Welcome to another Swordmaster Publications presentation. My name is Ernie Lawrence. Tonight we're going to be studying Deuteronomy chapter 21. We're going to head a little bit into the New Testament for this one because of a couple of things found at the end of the chapter, but this is a fairly straightforward chapter, nothing too incredibly hard in it, but I do like the way that this chapter really stresses the idea of innocence and also really clarifies for a lot of people who kind of cherry pick verses about how awful and evil the Bible is, about how the men who went to war would just go in and they would grab up all of the women and they just wanted to make them kind of like sex slaves or whatever, and that's entirely not true. That's not the way that the law says that they're supposed to do that. And so this chapter does a good job of clarifying how those women are to be treated if they're to be brought in for the purpose of marrying and bearing children and stuff like that. So anyway, let's get started. Deuteronomy chapter 21 and verse 1 says, "If one be found slain in the land which Jehovah your God gives you to possess it, lying in the field, and it be not known who hath slain him, then the elders and your judges shall come forth, and they shall measure unto the cities which are round about him that is slain. And it shall be that the city which is next unto the slain man, even the elders of that city, shall take a heifer which has not been wrought with, that is, hasn't done any work, and which has not drawn in the yoke. And the elders of the city shall bring down the heifer into a rough valley, which is neither eared nor sown, and shall strike off the heifer's neck there in the valley. And the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come near, for them Jehovah your God has chosen to minister unto him, and to bless in the name of Jehovah. And by their word shall every controversy and every stroke be tried. And all the elders of that city that are next unto the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer that is beheaded in the valley, and they shall answer and say, Our hands have not shed this blood, neither have our eyes seen it. Be merciful, O Jehovah, unto thy people Israel, who you have redeemed, and lay not innocent blood unto your people of Israel's charge. And the blood shall be forgiven them. So shall you put away the guilt of innocent blood from among you, when ye shall do that which is right in the sight of Jehovah." So this first section here, these first 9 verses, deal with somebody is found killed in a place. Doesn't matter what the location is, but nobody saw it. There is no evidence of who did it or how it happened. Nothing but the dead body. And what God says to do here is to have the elders and judges, the people who were leaders of Israel, would come out and they would determine which city was the closest. And whichever city was the closest, the leaders of that city would come out and they would investigate. They would try to find out what they could. And then after they found out whatever they could, if they still couldn't determine how it happened, who did it, or anything like that, then they were going to make a sacrifice to make Israel, all of Israel, but specifically that city, free of the guilt of the shedding of this blood. As far as God is telling them, you don't know why this person was killed. And so as far as you are concerned, this person is innocent. So he says it here. Verse 8, lay not innocent blood unto thy people of Israel's charge. And so shall you put away the guilt of innocent blood. Now it may be that this guy was a murderer. Let's say the guy that was killed was a murderer. And the person who was the avenger of blood found him and killed him. And then maybe something happened to the avenger of blood that he couldn't report it properly, or he couldn't deal with it correctly. And so, whatever the circumstances, maybe the guy was a bad guy. And so he wasn't innocent, and he was killed. Fine. But if he was innocent, then this absolves anybody roundabout of that innocent blood. And God is very, very clear on that. Now, here's some interesting things. Number one, innocent blood. The idea of innocent blood is somebody is going about their life and they're living under God's rule and under his law and doing what he's supposed to, even if they were somebody who has sinned, they're still considered an innocent person, because God is looking forward to the cross and the blood of Christ cleansing the righteous of the guilt of their sin. So it's a very powerful thought there of how God views mankind. He's eternal. He doesn't view things the same way that we do. God looks down during this time before his son has been crucified, and he already sees the blood that flowed backward from the cross to cleanse these people. And he sees them as innocent. He calls them righteous. Abraham was considered righteous. Now, from Abraham's perspective, and from the perspective of these people, this is an imputed righteousness. This is kind of righteousness on credit, looking forward to the Messiah. But from God's perspective, his perspective is eternal. Remember, he's holding, I've said this before, God is like holding the timeline of like a string. One finger here, the beginning and the end. He's looking down and can see the whole timeline all at once. And so that's God's perspective. And so he calls these people innocent. He refers to them as innocent. And that's interesting that he sees them that way. So that's the first little section here. The next section deals with the women, the foreign women here. It says, when you go forth to war against your enemies, and Jehovah your God has delivered them into your hands, and you have taken them captive. Now note, this is not the 6 nations that were wholly wicked, like before the flood and worthy of destruction. These are other people who, for whatever reason, they're going against them for war, so they can take them captive. And you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you have a desire unto her that you would have her to your wife. You shall bring her home to your house, and she shall shave her head and pare her nails. Now, there is implied here a willingness of the woman to be the wife. It's not. There's no force here. God is not in favor. We've already seen how he deals with the idea of forced sexuality and rape and things like that. He is absolutely against it. So there's an implied understanding here that a guy goes to war, finds a beautiful captive, wants her to be married to him, and she consents. And so, what is going on here? Oh, that was random. Just completely shot down to the bottom. Anyway, she consents to the marriage, and so she shaves her head and pares her nails, and puts on the raiment, or puts off the raiment of captivity. She's no longer considered a captive, and she dresses as a free person. She's not a slave anymore. So again, there's this implication of free will on her part, that she's not forced into this marriage, but she remains in the house. She bewails her father and her mother a full month. In other words, she's not going to be a virgin anymore. She's no longer this person who has not been married before. This was a fairly common thing where they would look at their life prior to marriage, and their being under the authority of their parents or whatever. They're not going to be part of that family anymore. The woman is not going to be part of that family anymore. She's now going to be part of this new family. And so there's this bewailing of her parents. We see this with Jephthah's daughter and stuff, that she bewailed her virginity because she was no longer going to be eligible for marriage. And so that was something that she was allowed to mourn, or allowed to kind of celebrate in a sense of I'm giving up something. I was part of this, and now I'm giving this up. And so the woman here that's a captive is no longer a captive. She's now somebody that is engaged to, or betrothed is what they would say at this time. And then after a month, you shall go in unto her and be her husband. So the consummation and the marriage, that kind of all went in together. And they didn't necessarily do it the way we do, where there's like a long party and, maybe traveling and stuff like that. It was basically you got married, then you went upstairs and consummated the marriage and stuff. So that's what this is talking about. But you'll go in into her, be your husband, she shall be your wife. There's no second class wife here. This idea that she's going to be your wife is that she is your wife just like anybody else is your wife. So she is a free woman under Israel. And we're going to see this here in the next verse, is that she is no longer a captive. She's put off that captivity. And so, remember, we saw in Matthew 19 that Moses, and we've talked about it in other places, that Moses allowed a bill of divorcement, that if a man and woman just weren't making it, that they could divorce, they could legally end the marriage. And here, this is a woman who is married under the law of Israel, under the law of Moses, and she gets the same rights and privileges as any other woman, even though she is not of Israel and not by blood descended from Abraham. She's still free. And so it says, if it shall be, if you have no delight in her, then you shall let her go whither she will. Okay, she is able to leave you, and we know from other places that this means divorce, that she is able to go out with a bill of divorcement, and she is free. But you shall not sell her at all for money. She's not a captive anymore. She's not a slave. She's not a bondservant. This is not somebody that you own as a captive of a neighboring nation that you conquered. She is a free woman, and so you cannot sell her for money because she's not a captive. You shall not make merchandise of her, because you have humbled her. You have brought her under your authority, and you have made her into your wife. You have made her into a free person by marriage. Now, there's an interesting thought. I've heard this, I've seen this a couple of times in Bible classes, I've heard this before, but think about this for just a moment. The church is the bride of Christ. The church was a captive, but Christ saw this woman, and instead of making her a servant, made her his wife. The church became his wife, his bride. Made her free. And there's this type relationship here that I've never heard anybody else express. But just think about that. The people who make up the church were in bondage to sin. And Jesus goes out and conquers. And this woman, this church is pictured as the bride of Christ. Galatians 4, Revelation 21, a couple other places. And this, Ephesians 5, and he sees this woman, this entity that is a captive of this foreign place that he's conquered, in a sense. And he frees her and makes her his bride, and she is free indeed. Even to the point of, if you look at the majority of the church after the first couple of decades, Gentiles, mostly Gentiles. There's only a few Jews that overall speaking, that became part of the church. Most of the Jews rejected Jesus. And so there's just an interesting picture here of the way that Jesus looked at the church and freed her and made her his bride. And it really kind of reverberates back to this passage to help us understand the woman here in this particular instance, the real physical individual, not the church is kind of a metaphorical woman. This is a real woman, a real captive, a real individual. And the way that Jesus viewed the church and freed the church and made the church his bride out of captivity, the way that he treats her is the way that God is saying they should treat these women that were these captive women. And it's a powerful image that just it as I was studying this, it came to me that this is really what there's this kind of back and forth between the Old Testament and the New Testament in our understanding of this, that they help us going forward and then coming back. There's a help of understanding even deeper than what's just written straight here. And so I hope you understand where I'm going with this, and not just me. It's not really me at all. It's where God is going with this, where God is teaching us both here under the Old Testament and in the New Testament, and then our understanding of the Old Testament grows because of the New Testament. And so it's one of those places where normally the Old Testament helps our understanding of the New Testament, but there's a lot of times where the New Testament can explain things in the Old Testament that we just didn't really understand very well, especially some of those hard places. So anyway, that's the end of that section. Verses 10 through 14 is the captive woman who is freed and made into a wife. And then it says in verse 15, if a man has two wives, one beloved and another hated, and that word hate there, that's kind of King James-ish, but it's an extreme to make a point. God's not really saying that you hate somebody, because true hatred, the word hatred, really means that you despise somebody so much that you want to see them dead and you don't mind being the one to do it yourself. That's what real hate is. But what he's showing here is an extreme in a guy has two wives. He really, really likes this one, but he doesn't like this one at all. And perfect example of this is with Jacob and Leah and Rachel. And he really, really liked Rachel. Didn't really like Leah that much. He was kind of tricked into marrying her, and she wasn't as good looking and whatever. And so God is kind of drawing on that and Israel's knowledge of that, because that's fairly common knowledge, especially after Moses writes Genesis, right? Remember, he wrote Genesis during this 40 years of wandering. So this is information that was probably handed down orally by tradition to these people, but was reminded in written form when, by inspiration, Moses wrote the book of Genesis for them. So they've probably read it pretty fresh, and now God is saying, okay, think about Jacob, think about Israel and his two wives. Okay? So if a man has two wives, one beloved, one hated, and they have borne him children, both the beloved and the hated, and if the firstborn son be hers that was hated, so like Leah, then it shall be when he makes his son to inherit that which he has, that he may not make the son of the beloved firstborn before the son of the hated, which is indeed the firstborn. So two women, we'll call them Leah and Rachel. Leah has the firstborn son, and he is the first child born to this man. And then Rachel comes along and she has a son, and that's the firstborn of Rachel and this man, but that son is not the firstborn of the man, and it's through the men that inheritance comes. And what God is saying here is that you cannot say that Rachel's son is the quote-unquote firstborn because you like Rachel more. Leah's son was the true firstborn, and he has to be treated that way, even if you don't like Leah too much. Okay? But he shall acknowledge the son of the hated for the firstborn by giving him the double portion of all that he has. That's what the firstborn got. For he is the beginning of his strength, and the right of the firstborn is his. You can't take away somebody's right because of your feelings. You have to follow the law, is essentially what God is saying here. Okay? So there's just a quick few verses here on that, very clear, straightforward. Okay, your firstborn indeed gets the double portion, even if you're married to two women, or two or more women, and you don't really like the one that bore the firstborn. So you don't get to cheat him out of his double portion because he is the firstborn of the household. Okay. All right, and then verse 18. Now this is one of those places where a lot of people will come and they don't read things, they don't understand context, they don't get into the word study, they saw it on the internet somewhere, and they're just going to pick on this verse because it's there. And we're gonna dig a little bit deeper, a little bit of apologetics tonight, and we're gonna kind of diffuse this so that if somebody ever throws this in your face, you can properly understand how to diffuse their silly little argument, because they're not trying to find a discrepancy honorably. They're trying to nitpick so that they don't have to follow the Bible, is what they're trying to do when they come to passages like this. Okay, so it says, if a man has a stubborn and rebellious son, which will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and that, when they have chastened him, will not hearken unto them, then shall his father and his mother lay hold on him, and bring him out unto the elders of his city, and unto the gate of his palace. And they shall say unto the elders of his city, this our son is stubborn and rebellious, he will not obey our voice, he is a glutton and a drunkard. Now pay attention to those words. And all of the men of his city shall stone him with stones, that he die. So shall you put away evil from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. Okay? Now, I'm gonna tell you what I normally get when this passage comes up. Somebody's trying to challenge the Bible. The Bible says you should stone your children, and by that they mean little bitty kids. Like your 2-year-old, your toddler's throwing a temper tantrum and won't listen to you. You can't get him to obey you no matter what. He's throwing a fit. You bring him to the elders and you stone him. The Bible says kill little kids for disobedience. No. Pay attention to the full context. How many 2-year-olds do you know that are gluttons and drunkards? Your little 3-year-old's a little too much into the sauce. No, this is an offspring, a son, who is an adult. Under the law of Moses, the family lineage is powerful. They're still, to an extent, that because of the honor of your father and mother, there's still authority here. Remember, even Abraham, when he was old, still had authority over his household. Isaac, when he was old, still had authority over his household. His sons were grown, and he still had authority over them. And so, if you have a grown son or daughter, because remember, these laws apply equally to females, they just use males because that's the accommodating language. And if they are grown and they're a layabout and they do not honor you, because that's what this is really about. They're not honoring you. They're not listening to you. They're a glutton and a drunkard. They're a complete waste of life. And you've tried everything. And this isn't just, our son is having an off day, but you have chastened him. You've tried to correct him. And he is just living an awful life. Mother and the father. Now remember, mother and father lay hold on him. That's powerful, because these are the parents that are having to do this, and it's because it's about getting rid of the rebellion, the corruption, the evil from Israel. And so God really required all the time people who were directly related. It would be like, going back to the Avenger of Blood. If somebody killed one of my brothers, it would be my responsibility under the law of Moses to chase that person down personally and execute them for the murder. Or if I committed a sin, I'm the one that cut the head off the sacrifice. There's a lot of personal responsibility and direct involvement here. These days we don't have that. These days the family of a murdered individual may, if they so choose, go sit in the room while an injection is put into the murderer in front of them. But they don't have to take direct part in it. They're not involved in that way. But this is a very visceral, violent time in humanity's history. And God is trying to show how awful sin is and how vile it is and how to really purge it from you to preserve the nation. To preserve the nation. And so you have a layabout son, a person who's grown, an adult, but he's a layabout, and a glutton and a drunkard, so we're not talking about little children. And he won't accept correction, he's just a bum. Then put the evil away from you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. It's important for them to fear not only the sin and what sin can do to you, but God's holiness can't stand sin, will not stand sin, and seeks to purge it one way or the other. And so they needed to understand that, because under the law of Moses, this was the way sin had to be dealt with, because sin couldn't actually be forgiven under the law of Moses. Okay. Last two verses, and this is where we get a little bit more into the New Testament here. If a man has committed a sin worthy of death, and he be put to death, and you hang him on a tree, sound familiar? His body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but you shall in any wise bury him that day, for he that is hanged is accursed of God. That your land be not defiled, which Jehovah your God gives you for an inheritance. So that brings us Galatians 3:13. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, talk about the law of Moses, being made a curse for us, for it is written. Where is it written? Deuteronomy 21:22 and 23. Cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. That's where it's written. You ever wondered? Galatians 3:13, where is it written? It's written in Deuteronomy chapter 21. But look at what happened the night that Jesus was crucified. The Jews, therefore, because it was the preparation that the body should not remain upon the cross, on the tree, on the Sabbath day. For the Sabbath day was a high day. That high day there's talking about the double Sabbath. Friday was a Sabbath. And then you have Saturday was the regular Sabbath. So besought Pilate that their legs might be broken, that might take them away. They had to bring them down. And then you had Joseph of Arimathea come and bury the body. They had to do that. Had to take him down before sundown. That's not just a random thing. It's because of this law here. And so just a brief little look forward into the New Testament because of that. But if a man's committed a sin worthy of death, he's murdered somebody or something along those lines, if you decide to hang him on a tree, that dude's cursed. That's powerful. If you're putting him on a tree, you're putting him up there because you want him to be cursed. But you can't leave him up there because you would defile the land in doing so. And so the Jews were aware of this, and that's why they took Christ down off the tree when he became the curse for us. So anyway, that's Deuteronomy chapter 21. This has been a fairly short study, I think, but a powerful one. I think there's a great lesson to be learned in this chapter. And so thank you for joining me, and I look forward to conversations. Had some good conversations about these lessons so far, and I appreciate that. Feel free to leave comments or contact me however you have access to me, and I look forward to talking with you about this in the future. So thanks again for joining me. My name is Ernie Lawrence, and this has been another Swordmaster Publications presentation.